Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very privileged to moderate the DAV Foundation's very first expert panel, and I welcome you all.
Globally, public transportation has thrived significantly in mega cities. So they're stifled by technology adoption and the drive to do new things and dynamic things, adopt newer areas and dynamic aspects of transportation that are continuing to evolve.
I think we're going to see entirely new service providers, such as those, that the DAV white paper talks a little about some of them. Organizations and individuals whose sole sort of purpose is to facilitate servicing and restocking and so on of vehicles. Things that are typically accomplished by drivers today will be, accomplished by, specialized service depots and so on in future.
There is these multiple actions that I have to do that are not definitely seamless to make myself go from point A to point B. So in the future, you can imagine that it'll be much better, seamless for me, where things are, things are happening, and I'm guided to those things, and I don't have to bother booking or making a reservation.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is John Fraser, and I'm with the DAV Foundation. I feel very privileged to moderate the DAV Foundation's very first expert panel, and I welcome you all. In addition to myself and our representatives from Brightby, we have two of DAV's advisors and some members of the press attending the panel today. Any questions can be asked during the session in the chat room in Zoom. Those questions will be answered at the end of the panel. If we run out of time, they will be answered via email, or we can arrange for follow-up interviews after. When I'm done with this opening, I'll be asking our panelists to provide just a brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll get to the actual panel, which is divided into three parts: the journey so far, mobility and transportation today, and the future of transportation. Also, I have a disclaimer I'd like to read out on behalf of one of our panelists. Sai Yagnayamurthy is speaking on his own behalf as an advisor during this panel session. His opinions offered are his own and are not representative of the Ford Motor Company.
Pleasure being here, guys, and talking to you, representing the thought leadership that DAV Foundation has established. I'm Sai Yagnayamurthy, part of Ford Motor Company Mobility Group. I lead their partnerships globally, mobility partnerships, and I've been with Ford relatively for a short span for about 18 months. And before that, I was with Verizon for over a decade doing both strategy as well as product. Thank you.
I'm Nick Johnson. I'm the creator and lead of ENS, the Ethereum name service, and also an Ethereum core developer.
Great, thank you, Nick. So let's go right into the first section, which is the journey so far. We have a number of questions. I'm going to be directing them to individual advisors, and when the panelists answer, I'll throw it out to the other advisor and see if there are any more thoughts to be added.
Now, if you look back at the history and the evolution of transportation and where we are at today, I would like to make a few distinctive remarks, right? Firstly, I would like to take on the public transportation, space and its evolution. Globally, public transportation has thrived significantly in mega cities. It has not taken off to that much of significance in other areas. But the one issue that public transportation has always had, which is, across the world, public transportation runs in losses. So they're stifled by technology adoption and the drive to do new things and dynamic things, adopt newer areas and dynamic aspects of transportation that are continuing to evolve. So there is part of that public transportation space that is tax funded, but that has probably not grown as much as we wanted it to provide safe and easy commute for all of us. On the other hand, we have had significant increase in terms of adoption of vehicles on the road, be it cars, be it bikes. Globally, if you take the number of vehicles have significantly increased in this past decade, with China and East Asian markets coming to bear. A lot of manufacturing, a lot of transportation growth has shifted to an extent where major automotive companies, if you imagine, have taken on China as their biggest growth market to an extent where, although they have exited markets like Europe, India, they are holding on to China being their top market. So that's another important trend you all have to understand and keep in mind. But if you take the major constituent, which is consumers and cities in general, transportation has more or less caused a bit of more, troubles for us in terms of congestion, in terms of more pollution, air quality, livability in major cities. If you take the major corridors across any part of the world, transportation has only become more of a pain than actually a comfort. But there have been significant changes in the past 4 years or 5 years with the introduction of what we call as transportation network operators like Uber, Lyft. Globally, they have eased from a cost standpoint the ability to get from point A to point B for consumers. So the aspect of technology, marketplace, technology improvements and marketplace type services have significantly enabled newer transportation services to be introduced. And for consumers, this has been a really good news. And the force at which the recent evolutions of transportation network operators have done is they have forced the whole change in thinking, of paradigm thinking for OEMs and several players in the market. Now, public transportation is thinking of dynamic public transportation. Auto OEMs are thinking, oh, our future is not just about selling cars. And you have technology companies like Apple, Google, experimenting in self-driving technology, as well as other aspects like, flying cars, which of course, something that Boeing and others have invested in. So historically, although we landed at a place where we have gone through significant pains with congestion and everything, in the past 4 years, there have been significant improvements that will leapfrog us in terms of transportation in a major way. So the impact has been significant. I'll tell you why, right? When in a mass scale automotive have been introduced to consumers, a lot of infrastructure in transportation began to be built around people driving cars. If you think of cities, how they evolved, highway infrastructure, how that evolved, a lot of highways followed, for example, the increasingly number of cars that came into market. We started to begin investing significantly in parking infrastructure. So you can imagine, cities began to enforce laws in terms of commercial real estate, in terms of number of parking spots that need to be, constructed alongside as well. So you can imagine the impact is significant from not only the adoption of, personal automobiles, but also in terms of how public infrastructure has developed, whether it be highways or parking structures. Now, obviously, transportation has created a significant amount of job growth across major countries. So it definitely created more mobility of people being able to easily get from point A to point B, of not just people but also things, right? The things that we care for. I mean, if you think about the growth in e-commerce and the delight of getting things to your doorstep, all of that is possible because of what transportation industry has created or enabled. So I would probably say the impact is significant. It's become to an extent the backbone of any major country you can imagine. Workforce got diversified, mega cities got built. People started to build their homes not just near the place that they work, but a bit far and be able to commute back and forth. So I would probably say that the impact is multi-fold as well as multi-vertical. And I'm here to just also clarify any additional questions you may have.
I think the bulk of the impacts it's going to have are still to be seen. As Sai pointed out, the vehicle has sort of shaped the city. Like the the environments we live in are to a very large degree shaped by how we move around in them. And I think that it's still very early days for blockchain's involvement with transportation, but that we should be expecting it to make some enormous changes in terms of how it affects the built environment and the world we live in, and that we shouldn't just be expecting the same but more of it. And not just taxis that are cheaper because they're driverless and things like that, but that it will lead to some real substantial changes in not just how we get around, but how we structure our entire built environment. If you're in a situation where, for instance, vehicles can be summoned at a moment's notice from anywhere and no longer require a driver to move them around, then we should expect changes in ownership and therefore in parking, needs, which means reshaping in how you structure cities around, the needs of people to park and to use vehicles, which means changes in even how you transport goods when you can just the vehicle rolls up, you load the stuff into the back and it trundles off to its destination without needing human supervision. So I think the really exciting stuff is in the near and the mid-term future rather than what's already happened.
Fantastic, thank you, brilliant. So that was a look into the past a bit and a little bit about today, but now we're going to move forward to today and the very near future.
One thing that we all take for granted when we think of transportation is human minds think of transportation as, oh, I get in my vehicle, I drive around, I get in a plane or I get in a train, right? And these have been fixated in our minds because these have been traditionally what have been most commercial modes of transportation. Of course, we shouldn't forget the 2 legs we have and the walking we do. But I think the significant advances that have recently taken shape and that will be exciting to look forward to is particularly how new areas of transportation came into bear. Drones are something that we all have seen take off in the past 3 to 5 years. Now, initially, it started off as being a hobby. It started off also as being more of a military technology, and then soon it made its way in terms of how drones could enable goods movement, particularly to get goods to our houses in shorter time frames. And now we're talking about how drones can not only play in the commercial space, but also in human transport space. So if you think of the investments that went into drone companies that are promising to fly you and I around a few square blocks at a few square miles, they have been significant investments in that space. So that's one. The second one, of course, not to forget, self-driving, which have been a culmination of multiple technology advancements, whether it is advancements in neural networks, in machine learning, in machine vision, and deep learning. The amount of algorithmic advances that have taken place purely in the technology space that have led to self-driving reality or somewhat of a commercial pilot reality at this point is significant. We all know there are several players in that space. Bay Area is filled with about half a dozen to dozen self-driving startups, big companies that have taken on major investments. Billions of dollars that got poured into this space is also another area to look forward to. And another thing that is coming up significantly is, as I said, how these multiple modes will culminate. What I mean by that is, you can imagine today there are silos of transportation, right? You have a preferred way to get to your work. You have preferred ways to get to points you need to get to. But tomorrow, you could imagine, the modes of transportation, whether it is walking, biking, self-driving cars, or public transportation, and these vertical takeoff drones that will transport you or I, they'll all have to come together and act cohesively so that we can choose the modes that are most optimal for us, and at the same time that are most cost effective to us. So those are some of the areas that I'm looking forward to from a transportation standpoint.
I think we're going to see entirely new service providers, such as those, that the DAV white paper talks a little about some of them. Organizations and individuals whose sole sort of purpose is to facilitate servicing and restocking and so on of vehicles. Things that are typically accomplished by drivers today will be, accomplished by, specialized service depots and so on in future. I think that we're going to see a more diversity in terms of what sort of vehicles we use and what we use them for. A lot of things are built around the assumption that you need a general purpose utility vehicle that does all of your things because you're only going to buy one and own that. But in a system where most people don't own vehicles but instead rent them as they need them, then there's a lot more room for specialized transportation so that you can summon something that is exactly suited to your needs when you need it.
I would probably say he was tipping the iceberg over there in terms of giving a particular scenario. But I can imagine if I put my experience of working at a cellular company prior to Ford on, you can see how over the past 5 years, cellular connectivity became an important point for connecting cars. Today, we take connectivity granted, consumers at least, and they expect the cars to be, connected, software to be updated on over the air, and they want to see how their phones behave. Similar behavior the consumers are expecting that from their cars today, and that is one of the reasons there's a lot of interest in and coverage in terms of what Tesla has been doing, right? And so if you think about that, connectivity enabled cars to be piping out data that then became very important in terms of understanding how people move, where people move, what are the hot pockets in a city that will eventually enable a lot of future modes of transportation. That's a nice scenario. And if you think about where connectivity is going from 3G to 4G we are in now and 5G that's going to come up, there'll be a lot of opening in terms of more services in the car. And with self-driving, you and I will not be driving, so we'll have so much of free time. And advertisers will make sure you and I don't sleep, right? So you can imagine there'll be content that will be piped into the car. So edge computing is important in terms of reducing the latency at which that content is piped into the car. 5G is important, and autonomous vehicles are important. And ultimately, I can see a future where you and I will have probably a more relaxed drive to, let's say, San Francisco City from Bay Area, where we are not stressed about driving, but we are enjoying the drive, maybe making a conversation, doing a business deal, or doing a video conference.
Fantastic. That's a great segue actually into the next question and the next section that we're going to be moving into. So we talked a little bit about what the near future looks like. Now we're going really into the future of transportation and what it could mean to the world with all of these changes that are coming.
Like I was saying earlier, I think we'll see a lot more diversity of transport methods because things that weren't practical to schedule on a regular basis or weren't practical for one individual to purchase for their sole use will become more practical because they can be allocated as needed to people. I think we'll also see a sort of maybe a blending or a less distinction between private infrastructure and public transport. So a typical commute for somebody in the future might look like stepping out your front door and into a rideshare vehicle with a couple of other people, or if you're traveling at an odd time, maybe just a little one-person car that can nip through traffic and split lanes for the first few kilometers to your local high-speed train stop, where you step off and straight into your carriage that whips you away to from your small community into the bigger city for your job or whatever, and then takes you at high speed to an exchange with another sort of on-demand vehicle that takes you the last mile, or somewhere you can pick up a bike and take it the rest of the way. And then, you've got the cargo end of things where instead of a lot of people having to dedicate large parts of their lives to, driving heavy goods vehicles overnight through, through unpleasant terrain, that all of this gets transported in, in the dead of night by automated vehicles and unloaded by automated forklifts and so on, so that it can be, supplied as needed, and for your home stuff, perhaps delivered by drones, to your doorstep and ready for you when you get home in the evening, just as a sort of a life in the day type scenario.
Oh, I like Nick's dream a lot. I think I'll utter some keywords, and I'll then stitch the story together. And this is also echoing what Nick has just said, right? Seamless is important, multimodal, low cost, better experiences, and then last but not the least, better, lower pollution. So I'll just stitch all of these things together now, right? So if you think about seamless, today we are in a world where we have to, if we have to hail multiple modes of transportation and think of that ourselves. What I mean by that is, I have to look at, let's say, the train schedule, understand, where I need to get in, where I need to get off. I have to then hail a Uber or a Lyft or, a last mile, service, and then wait for that to come, or rent a bike. So there is these multiple actions that I have to do that are not definitely seamless to make myself go from point A to point B. So in the future, you can imagine that it'll be much better, seamless for me, where things are, things are happening, and I'm guided to those things, and I don't have to bother booking or making a reservation. So that's one. Multimodal, as Nick pointed out, we cannot sustain, single mode journeys, and so we'll have to rely on multiple modes, whether it is walking, biking, public transportation, autonomous vehicles, drone liftoffs. Hopefully we'll have oxygen tanks, everything. And then multimodal is important, and then cost effective, right? I mean, ultimately, if you think about it, consumers on an average today, whether it is car ownership or a combination of Uber and Lyft, they spend about $10,000, about anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 on transportation per year per household, right? Or actually more than that. So if you can imagine, that's a significant cost for any household, for any individual. So the hope is, as the marketplaces like Lyft and Uber have not only proliferated availability, but also reduced the cost burden of transportation, this future of transportation that is seamless and multimodal is cost effective as well. Now, when it comes to better experiences, as I said, today we are so focused on transportation that, switching on even a song in the car is considered distraction. So you can imagine in the future, with these multimodal experiences, we will have our preferential content, our preferential services available across those multiple modes, and we'll be able to enjoy them either in an augmented fashion or more immersive fashion. And it'll just be a future world that you can dream of, in Hollywood movies today, right? And last but not the least, better quality in terms of reduced pollution, reduced congestion. Ultimately, we all want to be able to enjoy the quality of life that the city provides to us. So all of these modes, will probably be electrified, so they will be emitting less emissions. So it'll mean less pollution for us. And hopefully, because we'll be in a future where these multiple modes act more seamlessly, there'll be less congested roads in LA, on Washington, Bridge on the East Coast, or anywhere else in the world. So these are probably the factors that come to my mind of the dream future. We're getting there, and for that dream future, if you had to put a number to it, I would probably say 10 to 15 years. The only reason being, There's still a lot of evolution that's going to take place across these new modes of transportation that Nick also pointed to. And then you have to imagine these things talking to each other seamlessly. And then, I mean, if you take the journey that Uber and Lyft have taken in the past 7 years to get to where they're at, and you can imagine now if these new areas or 5 factors that I pointed out coming together, it'll at least be another 7 to 10 years from there to get to a good state of adoption. And then for it to be widely adopted, it'll probably take another 5 to 10 years from there. So I would probably say we're getting there in each piece and one piece at a time, but then the jigsaw will come together probably in 10 plus years.
I think there's a couple of main ones. One of them will be regulatory, basically convincing governments and organizations that this is safe and it should be enabled. I think another is going to be technical in terms of integrations. A lot of things are made more difficult than they would be otherwise because you effectively have to convince a lot of disassociated parties to cooperate together and to pick a common protocol. And so things like the protocols DAV are providing and proposing are essential to that, because when things speak a common language, they're far more able to interact effectively. I guess those would be the 2 main things. In more broadly, anything that requires a massive revolution, a rewrite in order to function is always going to be far more difficult than people predict. It wasn't that long ago that we thought that the only way we would get autonomous vehicles is if we refitted all the roads to support them. And there's a reason that that's been sort of technically possible for quite a while, but completely unachievable. And it's only when you find an incremental solution like, machine learning and computer vision that enables cars to survive in autonomous vehicles to survive in an environment with unpredictable humans, that you arrive at an actual practical solution.
Yeah, I think I agree with Nick. He pointed out, the 2 crucial factors, regulatory. I meet a lot of city officials who keep asking, how should we be thinking of the future mandates or policy setting that we should be thinking of from AVs, autonomous vehicle standpoint? I mean, the reason they need to do that is because they have invested so much in public infrastructure, and come Uber and Lyft, they have that, which have stolen away, which have made life easier for us, but from a public transportation utility standpoint, they have stolen away definitely some rides that those trains or buses would have taken. So it kind of puts them under pressure too. So they're thinking of what policies they should be thinking of. Insurance companies are also thinking how their future of business would be. But then, so I agree, regulatory is definitely one. Secondly, the technology interaction, the commonality, the common language, the platforms, the standards. You can imagine that will be a huge, not a roadblock, but a stepping stone if that happens, because the ease at which things talk to each other, will also enable some of those future dream experiences I talked about. And then last but not least, the only addition I have is business models, because ultimately you have a lot of private companies trying to vie to gain market share in this space, new entrants, incumbents, and so there will be business model disruption. And ultimately, what new business models will we be in? Will we have a subscription model? Will we have an on-demand model, or will we have more of a pay-as-you-go model? Or a combination of, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that business model evolution will take place, which will be another roadblock. Not a roadblock, but another transformation in terms of what it is today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sai. I believe that takes us to the end of the panel questions. If there are any immediate questions from the press, please send them on over. You've got an opportunity now, and if not, and you'd like to give it some thought, we can certainly follow up in email.
We have a lot to learn in terms of how air transportation what air transportation has to offer. If you think about it, I'll give you a couple of examples, right? They were the first ones who adopted mobile ticketing to an extent where QR codes, adoption was wide, and we all now carry our airline barcodes on our mobile phones. It's a huge experience difference. I mean, from a consumer standpoint, and airlines, the way they are structured, you can imagine there are clear suppliers of airliners like the Boeings and Airbuses of the world. Then there are operators, right? You have multiple airline companies. There are then aggregators of demand like Kayak, Priceline, and other companies. So if you think about it, you can think of a similar model coming to bear, in the transportation space, where you have to understand we don't know where the current OEMs will end up. They're definitely the suppliers of vehicles, but then they can also play upstream in terms of becoming the companies that offers transportation services. And then you have Googles of the world who are coming from the other extreme, where they want to become the transportation service providers of the world, and they want to offer, and get multiple fleets on their systems. And the only other use case or example I would like to provide that's a good learning curve from the airline industry is, now airlines have begun to offer significant experiential. They're getting into a lot of experiential, differentiation, which is, if you get on a flight now, you can text, you can browse, you can watch movies, you can chat, and so they're also paving way in terms of what are the best modes to either use those experiences to create differentiation or create monetization. So a similar thing will also be a good learning curve for us in the transportation space. So those are the thoughts that come to my mind in terms of what we can learn from them and implement.
I just wanted to address one component of that, the question about cities or regions making it particularly easy to test new technologies. First thing that comes to mind, to me anyway, being in the space, is any of the autocratic states. They're the ones who are going to be able to push through the new technologies just because they're an autocratic state, right? They don't have, they are the government. They're the ones with the political will to do so, and they don't have the challenges, the backlash that you would normally see from a non-autocratic state for issues dealing with public safety or regulatory issues that are supposed to protect the public. So that's my contribution there to that particular part of the question. So Mobi is tackling the same problem that DAV is, but from a completely different angle. So Mobi has gathered together the large automakers and some other players in the space, and they're trying to, and they figure that blockchain is an important part of the future of transport, and so they're looking for a solution, and they're looking to create standards with that group. The DAV Foundation's approach is different. We're going bottom up. We have a technical solution. We're more grassroots oriented, and our solution is that, well, we have one, and now we're going to seek adoption. So that's my contribution there. Thank you, everyone. To the panelists, thank you so much for your time and your thinking. That was a fascinating dive into the space. Thank you to the members of the press for attending and listening to us. And I guess we can adjourn from this point on.